Ed Stafford is a survivalist, explorer and adventurer, an internationally acclaimed motivational speaker and author who's been described as Britain's most intrepid hero since Scott of the Antarctic. He's experienced extremes all over the world and is the Guinness World Record-holding first man to walk the Amazon. Ed splits his life between filming around the world and spending time at home in London. He blogs about anything related to adventure, remote travel and health and fitness. Ed Stafford, thank you very much for coming on Under the Skin.
Absolute pleasure.
What fascinates me most about your work as a sort of a survivalist or an adventurer is the way that you talk about the sort of conscious and spiritual component of surviving in extreme situations, but in a way your background is traditional in the sense that you're from the military.
Yeah, it is straight under the skin then, isn't it, really? I think, Russell, I mean, I've always thought it was... I'm in the world of adventure. I've done it off the back of a military career, and yet for me, the sort of... the obvious parts of adventure, the crossing rivers, climbing mountains, sort of toughing it out, don't really interest me as much as the psychological aspects. Clearly, I think... you know, there is a very physical element in everything I do, but the whole thing, since the military onwards, has been a bit of a spiritual journey, and it's just it's interesting for me how such a sort of stereotypical blokey bloke's job has ended up being actually one which has been quite a sort of spiritual journey. Yeah,
that is fascinating. That's perhaps what fascinates me most. Something that's superficially seems to be about overt modes of masculinity, such as toughness, endurance, survival. Ultimately, in your view, comes down to spirituality.
I think it's evolved. If I'm honest, I think when I, for example, wanted to walk the length of the Amazon, I think there was a lot of ego involved. I think I really wanted to prove to the world that I was super tough, beat my chest, and do something that everyone was saying was impossible. And so, in fact, that really annoyed me. You know, everyone said, "No, you're going to die," or they laughed at me, or they didn't think it was possible. And I was just like, I'm just going to prove them wrong. It was literally a two-fingered salute to those sort of naysayers. And I think just because it started in quite a sort of macho way, I suppose it's taken me by surprise, the journey it's taken me on, because there's nothing macho about what I do tonight, at the moment. You know, I really don't need to prove anything to anyone. And again, maybe this is just an age thing. I'm 41 now, so I think as you get older, you don't need to show off quite as much as you did as a kid. But yeah, certainly I think that what I'm doing now is quite meaningful, and I don't know. It keeps me learning. It keeps me in a position of being quite humble as well.
When you were in the military,
yeah.
My superficial and inexperienced, intuitive understanding of life in the military is that it must be extremely testing on you physically and mentally, and it must be a lot about making individuals behave in a cohesive way and respond well to authority. What was that like for you as an individual? What was it like for your mental health, the time you spent in the army?
If I'm honest, I don't think I took to the army at all well. I joined because I wanted to roll around in the mud and do an outdoor job and not sit behind a desk. And in that respect, I was correct. But I never really... There's a fear that I don't know whether you understand. When you even see a military camp and all that barbed wire around the outside, when I'd go into camp, I would get properly scared inside. And I left as a captain, so you shouldn't arguably be scared of the camps if you're at that level. And yet I did. It was a very disciplined environment. It was a very strict environment. And it is one that's run on discipline and sort of regime, and that wasn't me at all. I might have taken a lot from the military, but I've always been quite a free spirit, and I've always liked the ability to do what I want to do. I get up in the morning and I'd like to plan my own day rather than, you know, the next 6 months in advance is being planned for you. And so it was never really me. Even in training at Sandhurst, I was not counting the days till I finished training, which the other recruits were. I was counting the days till I actually could leave the military because I could tell it wasn't me. And yet it was something I almost did as a sort of finishing school, to give me the skills that I needed to do what I'm doing now. How
did you flourish in an environment that was so counter to the way you wanted to be and the way you saw yourself? How did you, because you obviously succeeded, you got to the rank of captain. How many years were you in the military?
I was in for 4 years. 4 years, yeah. I didn't flourish, if I'm honest. I feel like I come into myself in more recent years, in my early 30s rather than in my mid-20s, which was when I was in the military. I remember telling my commanding officer that I was going to leave, and he just smiled and said, "Yeah, that's probably best, isn't it, Ed?" I mean, I wasn't that good because I don't think I was that into it. I didn't have any interest in guns. People go on stag do's to Las Vegas and shoot Uzis. It just leaves me cold. I'm not interested. I did spend time in Afghanistan, and the other consultants, they were they couldn't wait to decommission the weapons off the Afghans so they could go into the middle of the desert and shoot bazookas and stuff. And it's just not me at all. And invariably, you can bluff your case for a little while, and then after a while, I reached the rank of captain, and I thought, this is about as senior as I want to go bluffing my case. I'm sure there's more to life as well. The battalion was going back to Northern Ireland for 2 more years and doing a really quite difficult job to keep the soldiers motivated in those sort of environments. And so I decided it was time to leave.
Well, I personally have tremendous respect for anybody that can endure the military, because when I imagine myself in those kind of environments, when you talk about individuality, in a necessity to respond to discipline, that makes me feel really scared. And the idea that you said about the camp, but I also have this sense that the military you'd refer to as a finishing school might be a place where greatness is accessed, in that you are tested as an individual, and like whether or not you can overcome and surmount certain challenges. Is that fair? Is that what it was like in some ways, in retrospect?
I think, yeah, a lot of the explorers around the world have been in the military. Ranulph Fiennes and, all of the people who have made a name for themselves. And I think there is a reason for that. I think it gave me a set of skills. It gave me not just the physical skills, packing a rucksack, navigating, those sort of very obvious ones, but also it allowed me to think flexibly, bizarrely. And you'd think the military would be quite regimented with the way it thinks, but they have got this thing called mission command, which essentially means if you know the end state of what you're trying to achieve, so your commanding officer has told you the end state, it's up to you as to how you do it. And so it does allow quite a lot of flexibility.
Conquer that area, or exactly, get to that place.
Attack that trench, and it's up to you as to whether you go, through the stream, straight up the middle, or around the forest and through cover or whatever it is. So
was that enjoyable, that side of things?
I think when I came out, when I started leading expeditions, it was good to be able to know that I could deal with situations and I could be flexible. So I did massively have to take my military hat off in many respects, because, a lot of the people that I was dealing with were local people, indigenous people from potentially third world countries, and you can't just go in there with your sort of army hat on telling people what to do or expecting things to run like clockwork, because you'll just end up exploding out of sheer frustration. So I had to completely take that off, chuck it all away, quite frankly, and I'm happy to shed that side of the military. As I go on year by year, the military has less and less influence over who I am today, definitely.
Did you, while you were in the military, question the agenda and the objectives and this? I suppose that inherently what is within military is the idea of force, the idea of coercion, the idea of control. So there are a lot of things, like on the level of our national identity, we have to conceal about the role of the military. I'm not talking about individual soldiers who it's very, very brave that anyone's prepared to put himself through that kind of suffering, and I admire them. But I'm talking about like the sort of like the political objectives of a military organisation, for example, in Northern Ireland. We'll just to take one very complex subject. Did that sort of stuff trouble you?
I think I never really believed in the Northern Ireland occupation, when we were out there, and that was therefore difficult to put on an official face. I was in charge of 30 soldiers. They were looking to me to sort of lead them through this experience of occupying another nation, and okay, we weren't fighting, but we were unwanted there. I was spat in the face loads of times.
Really?
And yeah,
you're kidding me. You've had that happen?
Of course. Every British Army soldier that's done any patrols in Northern Ireland would have had that happen. But if you think about it, if it was your backyard and suddenly observation towers are going up and people are spying on your houses and stuff, you'd be pretty outraged too. And so I don't feel any negativity towards any of the people that did that. I didn't believe in what I was doing, if I'm honest.
Right, you didn't believe it. So that must be, I imagine that would be hard enough if one had the mentality of Queen and country and the right of the British Empire to rule and occupy other territories. It would still be hard if someone spat in your face. But if you sort of felt it was wrong anyway, did it just feel like the physical representation of your own doubts?
I think if you sign up for something, sometimes, and this is really tricky, isn't it? Because everyone, I've developed over the course of years an ability to tell whether something's right or wrong by sort of trusting my gut. You know, you intuitively know whether you should be doing something or didn't. And yet I'd signed up to an organisation which it's got nothing to do with feelings or intuition. It was just literally, this is your orders and this was what you've got to do. And I've got to admit, I kind of just accepted that this is a role that you've got to fulfil for the next year or 2 years or whatever, and once you've done it, you can then break free and live your life as you want to do it. So I think I just sucked it up and got on with it at the time. I wouldn't go back to it now at all.
What was it then? So having been schooled, hardened, trained, taught by the military, well, how was it that you found yourself attracted to the seemingly impossible? I know that you were like strongly advised against trying to walk the Amazon, not least because it's made of water and only Jesus can do that. That you were advised that these were insurmountable challenges. What happened to you in the period from leaving the military to taking on these great physical and psychological trials? What made you think you could do it, and why did you want to do it?
I think as much as the military, I didn't get on with it for the reasons that I've explained. What I did like is being outdoors, and what I did like was physical challenges and spending time next to nature, I've got to be honest. And so the first job I took when coming out of the military was taking gap year kids on trips into the rainforest. So they were building a new visitor centre for a national park or something, and 18 to 24-year-olds, they're having a life-changing experience, and I got the chance to use the nice skills that come out of the military of being able to take them into the jungle safely. They'd be sleeping in hammocks and washing in rivers, and maybe doing a project which has got an ecological aim or a community-based aim, and mate, it was perfect as far as I was concerned. I was living almost, I got paid next to nothing for that job because it was charity work, but it was using all the really nice touchy-feely parts of. It was taking the army or expedition knowledge and actually putting it to good purpose. So there was always a conservation or a community aim and mission to each one of the expeditions, and I flourished in that environment. I loved it. I did it for about 8 or 9 years actually, and really enjoyed it. What did you learn in doing that? Well, it was more. Obviously, I'm not ordering people around. There's paying volunteers coming on these trips, and it was more just about letting go of all of the worries and all of the fears that I'd had being in the military. Suddenly, people all around me were having amazing life-changing experiences, and when you pull people into the jungle like that, and everyone's wearing the same grubby trousers and shirt, and there's no fashion, there's no phones, there's everything stripped away, and yet people, almost every single person on those expeditions at the time would have said, this has been the most amazing thing I've ever done in my life, because they come together, they bond, they work really hard, they're living in this almost like a commune in the middle of the jungle, and I think it was extraordinarily rewarding. It taught people, what life's about, how to look after each other, how to work as a team, and it was a youth development charity as well. So it was all about these people who probably didn't know anything about life, and this is the first time they've properly travelled away from home, but they've done it in quite a safe, organised way, because it's led by someone like me who's ex-military. But I don't know, it almost every single person, and I'm in contact with a lot of the volunteers that came on those trips, it changed their attitude towards each other, it changed their attitude towards nature, and they got a huge amount out of it. Yeah. People began to feel connected to each other and to nature and to who they really are. So I suppose what's implicit in that is that living in a civilised culture disconnects you from yourself. We start to form attachments to material objects
objects to things that aren't real, like the way that we envisage people isn't investigated. But when people are put into an environment that is stripped back, the reason they feel so great, feel so connected, is because they discover some kind of truth. And I suppose the spirituality, in essence, is about the discovery of truth, and that the fact that the truth is beautiful, the truth is connection, not alienation, loss, despair.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head by saying it's not really, I wasn't adding anything, I was just stripping stuff away. So yeah, all of the nonsense, all of the phones, all of the distractions, all of the, things that we all turn to when we're not feeling good, drugs, cigarettes, chocolate, whatever it is, there aren't any of those, and everyone was having to deal with a very raw version of each other, and I think that was lovely for a start. And, back in the day, people used to tell stories, didn't they? And, we would light a fire in the evening and cook on it and then sit around it and chat to each other. There was nothing else to do. And so you're looking up at the stars, you're contemplating, and it was, again, a world stripped away of the nonsense, I think. Yeah.
A world stripped away of the nonsense means that people go within themselves, but I don't imagine it's just plain sailing or sort of a communal Trumpton. I bet people go through a lot of anguish, don't they? I mean, I feel that I'm very attracted to what you do. I admire it very much, but it's with myself, there's quite a lot of fear in there. If I think, right, you've got to go and live in the woods, you're not going to have your phone, you're not going to have, like, there's a phrase, isn't there? We become prisoners of comfort. I feel that I am in many ways a prisoner of comfort, that I've not tested myself. I used to do this thing, and this seems like a mad thing to tell a survival explorer because it's so lightweight, but like I once went out with this woman that had an amazing estate. In the grounds of the estate was a dirty, stinking marsh pond, right? And I used to jump in it, right? And when you jump in it, it was really cold, it was freezing, and when I got in there, I'd go like, like the noise, and I'd think, what, like that, my body is capable not only of experiencing that cold, but also it's capable of making that noise. And all the time that I'm not experiencing that cold or making that noise, I'm disconnected from the guy that can handle that. So I'm like bobbing about just on the surface of who I am, never experiencing the truth of just as me as an individual on a sort of an anatomical, physical and essential way. So I'm imagining that in that is a tiny pipsqueak scrap of the thing that you're into, right? That you,
I think you're right. I mean, there's a movement at the moment amongst disillusioned people working in London called going on a micro adventure, and people will literally sort of 5 to 9, I think is the catchphrase. They'll leave work at 5. They'll take a train out into the countryside. They'll run up a hill, sleep on top of a hill, in the morning go and jump in a river, and then get back on the train and be in for work the next day. And I think, that's quite indicative of just people not being satisfied with this kind of mundane life, and they want to really experience life. And obviously it's uncomfortable sleeping on the hill, it's, bloody cold jumping into the water, and none of these things are actually conventionally good fun, and yet it somehow does press a reset button. It somehow does enable them to go in the next day to work with a smile on their face and feeling like they've actually done something. And it's very difficult to actually explain why they're doing it, but certainly I feel there is more to life than just, I don't know, getting on the tube and going to work and sitting in front of a desk. I'm not interested in being a number like that. I want to experience as much of life as possible, I suppose. So, like, in a way, we can sort of build an idea that urbanisation, industrialisation and a technological society is a way of turning people into kind of the fuel for a giant factory. Your role just becomes to, as a producer and as a consumer, in many cases more a consumer than a producer. Your connection to nature and reality has been severed. You're on the tube. But you're saying that these micro adventures are examples of people have this yearning for what's real. And are you saying that this yearning is something you always had, that you thought, I don't want to do some job where I'm basically in some version of prison? I'm trying to, I reckon feeling's more, personally, now, I reckon feeling is more important than thought. And I think we all get lost in our heads, we all, anxieties, fears, all this sort of nonsense going around our heads all the time. And I think what I'm talking about is just experiences which sometimes aren't logical. Why am I going to go and jump in a stream? Because it's having a very, very visceral experience. It's suddenly shocking all your body senses. It's making you feel alive again. And it's very hard to describe logically. I've got some really, really good Aboriginal Australian friends, and they once told to me is like, in fact, the first time I met this guy, he's like, we sat in the car, nobody said anything for about 5 minutes, and I was like thinking about loads of things, and after 5 minutes he went, will you shut the fuck up? Because there were so many thoughts going around my brain, and like, from an Aboriginal perspective, I'll try and tell this story quite shortly, but they believe that you've got 3 brains, the biggest brain being your gut and your instincts, the second biggest brain being your heart and your emotions, and the smallest brain being the logical brain. And the word that they use to describe the logical brain is called nandupuru. And nandupuru is also the word that they'd use to describe a fishing net that was all tangled beyond repair, or fucked in their words. And that's the word they use to describe the logical brain. And they said the reason that Western people confuse life so much is that they live in this logical brain, and it's a tool. Everything is meant to start in the gut. You know, all of everything that you do, the way you live your life, all starts down here. And okay, it gets filtered by your heart and your emotions, and then it latterly gets filtered in a lesser manner by your logic and your logical brain. But this, for me, immediately explained it. It just made everything click into place. It's like, it's not that that's not got a place. It has. It's a filter on the way out, but everything has to originate. And, you know, all sorts of expressions. We've got expressions in our own culture. You know, you follow your gut, but they really genuinely believe. And I have to admit, I have taken on the same beliefs. I think everything should originate here. And I think, you know, to live your life in an urban society where you're constantly watching the clock and you're involved in time and stresses and all this sort of stuff, it's all in your head, isn't it? And all they were doing was to try and tell me, and I did it because I was going to go and put myself on a desert island, so I thought they would be good people to speak to about this. And they said, the more you live in your head, the more problems you'll have, the more anxieties and fears and doubts, and they were absolutely right. The more you can come from an instinctual place, all of that just evaporates, and you can live, and you can have a decent time on the island.
That was great wisdom. How did you go from being the man in the car that's like they have to say shut the fuck up to because you're thinking too loudly? What did you learn from them, and how do you do that?
It's been a long journey. I mean, the Amazon was 2.5 years. That time, isolated completely on my own on the island, was 60 days, which is a long time in complete isolation.
You were 60 days in complete isolation?
Yeah. Well, I'll be completely honest. I was ill twice, and twice they sent in because I had a satellite phone to call in case there was. Twice they brought in a course of antibiotics, but then left me again. But other than
what did you feel like in the moments when someone drops off the antibiotics? So you're like, come here, talk to me, hold me.
You would think that I got angry at myself immediately. I used the satellite phone. I got angry that I was breaking this sort of
the rule that you'd set.
You know, I was going to have 60 days in isolation, and you know,
why did you call? What was up?
Myself. Well, because I'm not a doctor. I didn't know what was wrong. I was like,
what were you experiencing?
Gut cramps and pains, which I think the first one was trap wind, and you know, something so inane as that, and yet I'd obviously got myself, and it's very difficult to describe. I don't know whether you've spent extended periods of time in isolation.
No, mate. 10 minutes, I start to freak out.
Yeah, but it's from a spiritual perspective, it was one of the biggest catalysts I think I've ever experienced, because there was nowhere to hide. It was like a mirror to yourself, but you know, I couldn't distract myself in any way because there was nobody else there. It was almost like the enormity of just being in my own presence was overwhelming.
What do you mean, that enormity?
Okay, I think it's again quite difficult to explain, but I think we all live our lives, and I certainly used to, in a way where you bounce off other people. So in this interview, I'm constantly reading signals off you in order to get an interpretation of how I'm behaving. You know, the fact that the producer next to me isn't, you know, jumping up and down. It's like, okay, things are going okay, so I can continue to live my life in this way. Strip all of that feedback away, so it's just you. Suddenly, your sense of self is like, well, who am I? Because nobody's giving me any reflective sense of who I am. And I was literally almost vomiting on the beach. Genuinely, I was almost sick because the concept of who I was just evaporated, and I was scared. And I was literally all the hairs on the end of my neck. I was like, am I? And
because other people provide your parameters. If there's no feedback, no bounce back, who are you? I just had the image, Ed, of like the self being like a radiator, radiating out energy and imagery. And if that signal never gets bounced back, it's limitless, it's infinite. Once I met this man in America. He's a cowboy. I think he was around Dakota, and he said once, "There's only so much horizon a man can stand." Right. Like that, if there's just endless horizon, it's going on forever, and no one's telling you who you are, and you start to think, as you were saying, "Who am I?" So what happens next?
Okay, so now I'd love to say that the penny dropped on the island, but it didn't at all. It was afterwards. But
were you going through extreme anguish then? Someone's on that island.
Oh, it was a knife edge of I was self-filming a project for the Discovery Channel, but I was also going through this sort of isolation, extreme effects of being put in sort of solitary confinement.
Because solitary confinement is a punishment in a prison for a reason.
Well, okay, again, long story short, I came off the island, didn't have any sort of decompression therapy or anything like that, and then about a year later I was meant to be filming another series for Discovery, and I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying. I was my courage had, was through the floor. And again, long story short, but I went into therapy, and I have found out, because invariably when you do go through therapy, you get the sort of terminology for certain things. And the way I'd lived my life, they term as a reflected sense of self, but what they tried to engender within me was my own sense of self. So I'm not the concept of there being a horizon being you can only take so much, and again the isolation being so enormous is only because I could only feel comfortable when I was getting a reflected sense of self. If your sense of self is coming from the inside, because, for example, I had to start developing a moral compass. If I was to steal your pen and walk out today, it's not a big thing, but I wouldn't do it anymore because I wouldn't feel good about myself. But it doesn't matter whether you knew or whether, I now live my life in a really honest way. And I think having to strip it back and work out who I was about what I stand for as well. So I won't steal off you, and I won't cheat, and I won't lie. And I think that's the only true way to actually really know who you are as a person. It doesn't matter what anyone else knows or understands or can find out or anything like that. And I now go, okay, I can sit here knowing who I am, knowing that I'm now emotionally mature enough to have a wife and have a kid and stuff like that, because I know who I am. Whereas if it was all based on how I think I'm coming across to you, that becomes extraordinarily complicated very quickly. And I was in this trap, and I would honestly say that I walked the Amazon so that other people would say to me, "Mate, you're fucking incredibly tough." I walked the Amazon so I could then feel incredibly tough because they told me I was. And
it was an investment in a way.
But it's bonkers, and so many people do live their life in that way. And it's just like, coming from that true sense of self, you really have to dig down deep to find out who you are and what you do stand for, I think.
There's a thing you're right, I think. Well, there's a thing called codependency, like in 12-step circles, meaning that your identity is enmeshed with other people's identity and perception of you. Now, that thing you just described of like needing the feedback and approval of others, I feel like we have a culture that's fueled on that everyone's running on. Who am I? What do I want? Oh, I am my phone, I am my shoes, I am my job, I am what my wife thinks of me. I'm just describing myself. Now, for me, my journey has been about becoming an addict and having to let go of drugs that I was addicted to, then behaviours that I was addicted to, then ways of treating people that, all these things have had to be sort of slowly let go of. Yeah. And what you realise is those things are doing a job for you. They're holding you together. Yeah. So what I'm fascinated in the way that you have physicalised and extremised, if that's a word, like that principle by, say day 10, like you're saying, the whole of the island experience didn't bring about epiphany. You came back from the island and sort of had a mental breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, crikey, I think being kind to myself, I would have had to be a pretty superhuman person to do all of that self-evaluation and come to those sort of aha moments and film a programme for Discovery Channel and find food and water and all the other things. There was only so much I could do. I mean, it opened a can of worms, but I didn't manage, I didn't manage to come to any sort of massive life conclusions. I think
I'm certainly not being critical of you, Ed, saying you made a real mess of that time.
I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Again, because people said to me, that island was conducive to you being able to survive. There was no venomous snakes. Food was plentiful because you had coconuts and stuff. Why did you make such a meal of it? And yet, And I'm like, you've clearly never been isolated, have you? And crikey, some people manage it really well. You know, there's ocean rowers who go longer than I spent on that island and have absolutely no problems with falling apart.
I reckon they must be very strongly connected to purpose and direction. I reckon the only way, like this is obviously purely speculative in my sense, and except for this yet another micro example, once I had to do this stunt where I had to fall backwards off of a 30-foot thing into some crash mats, right? And I was so scared of doing it that the only way I could persuade myself to do it was by focusing on the small details of put your foot there, then put there, then doing exactly what the stuntman told me in that moment was my religion. Like, I do these things. And that way that the fear could be navigated by the coordinates of instruction I've been offered. So on that island, were you I was thinking that possibly the fact that you had to find food and keep yourself alive would have been, in a sense, structuring the experience, giving you something to hold on to, in fact.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely bang on, and actually that's, I think what I came to think afterwards is that because I didn't have a lateral, a journey from A to B, there wasn't anything to strive for. It was literally you're plonked on an island and you've got to deal with yourself. And there is no time pressure. There is no desperation to get food because it's all around you. And that was part of the problem. It was just like, this isn't about achieving anything. This is about you just becoming comfortable with yourself.
Can I ask you candidly, what coping mechanisms did you develop? Because I know that, like, for me, I'd be obsessive about food. I think masturbation would become an issue. I think I would find things that were like controlling my states of mind. Yeah. Were there things, because you said you vomited? I mean, that was obviously very physicalised. Did things like, I know it's a very plain and rude question to ask someone about masturbation, but did things like that become like, well, at least I can do that, or did that quickly become quite redundant?
Well, let's tackle that one first. But no,
obviously the one that interests me.
I didn't masturbate once on the island.
Whoa! So it didn't occur?
60 days. No, it occurred to me. One, I think when you're malnourished, a lot of your testosterone goes down and you aren't thinking in that way. I don't know whether it's something to do with, at times of famine, people weren't procreating because there wasn't enough food around, so that, it does affect your libido, definitely. Although it would have been a good distraction, you're right. I kind of put it out of my brain as well. I don't know why, but you can imagine this. I remember, studying for my A levels, for example, I would have done quite a lot, and you feel grubby, don't you? If you're doing that all the time. I didn't really want that to be the focus of my the highlight of my island experience.
60 paradise, a man alone with God. Now time for a wank. Now put those coconuts together there, and this seashell here.
Do you know what I did, Russell? Was because I was so scared of spending time on my own and spending time with myself. Again, this is a really crude way of doing it, very ill-evolved or unevolved, and I wouldn't do it today, but I made myself so busy that I didn't have time to sit with myself. So, for example, I decided I'd build a shelter, and I'd literally say, right, okay, I could get up in the morning and I make myself a little cup of tea, but I'm only going to allow 15 minutes for that, and then I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to spend 2 hours at work, and then at mid-morning I'm going to come back and I'll have a tea break, and I literally scheduled out the day so that I didn't have any time. And reflectively, I definitely think that's because I was so scared of those times when I was just reflecting, or when I was just sitting with myself, and so I kept myself extraordinarily busy to get around that, I think. So
your survival technique mentally was to keep yourself busy. What happened, when you did find yourself alone? What was the quality of the fear? What do the fear and the, what do you think? Oh, I'm not a good enough person. I made mistakes when I was a kid. I hate that. I hate myself. What were the frightening things that happened in your mind?
Okay, again, I mean, this is far from a sob story at all, and I think everybody's got their own story, haven't they? Everyone's got stuff that gives them issues laterally in life, and for me, it was adoption. I was adopted as a kid, and I didn't understand this for many years, and I got adopted by a very, very loving middle-class family. I got sent to a good school, and this is not a sub-story at all. However, there's a theory that...
Why do you think you have to keep saying it's not a sub-story?
Because I'm not... I don't want people...
Like getting adopted,
I don't
heavy,
need
mate.
people's sympathy, and that's not why I'm telling it. I'm telling it because it's... I think because it's... It kind of all doesn't make sense unless you go, well, hang on, why Why were you insecure? Why did you need to prove these things? And personally, I think that came from adoption. I can explain it quite briefly in the fact that there's a theory that a baby, when it's born to a mother, the biggest trauma it could possibly experience, to the equivalent of death, is being separated from its mother, because it can't feed itself and it can't do anything at all. Separate those two things on a very, very core level, you are experiencing the trauma of death.
Wow.
And then your whole life builds upon that insecurity of being abandoned, essentially. So I had huge abandonment issues, and that would spill out in all sorts of different ways, at school, and, you know, getting expelled for minor acts of vandalism, to in my 20s in the military, you know, drinking and getting into trouble with police and bits and bobs like that. And I just think, of course, every man's got, you know, testosterone, and every young man spills over and you know, gets into trouble. And I think that just shows spirit. But for me, the deeper insecurity, the reason I needed to go to the Amazon, the reason I needed to do something so big, is because my insecurity was so deep, I suppose. I just genuinely, you know, again, the whole concept of not really knowing who you are, not knowing what you stand for. I'd do anything. You know, if mates dared me to do anything, I'd literally do anything. There was no boundaries. And, you know, people like, you know, everyone knows people like that. There's just like, they're scary.
Crazy,
they're scary in certain
anything.
ways, because they will do for anything, absolutely anything. And I definitely fell into that category. As soon as you understand things like this, and the reason I think I say it's not a sob story is because once you understand your history, it doesn't matter anymore. It's just a chapter in your life, and I wouldn't actually trade any of that for all the money in the world, because it's made me who I am today. And I wouldn't have achieved what I've achieved in life, probably, if I'd stayed in the same family and been brought up in a very conventional way. So I'm really, and let's face it, it'd be a waste of energy to be anything other than happy with everything that's happened in the past, because it's happened, you know. But therefore, it's just a chapter in the book, and yeah.
Bloody good book. It became your gift. The wound became your gift. The damage of, like, as you said it, using your words there, Ed, the worst thing that could happen to a baby is it could be separated from a mother. That happened to you, and curiously, your life's agenda becomes, can I survive alone? That's the question.
Naked on an island.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt that was some sort of self-fulfilled prophecy.
Like an attempt to resolve the issue. The drama of your personal myth was, I am abandoned. Well, if I'm abandoned, I need to survive alone. Yeah. Can I? Yes.
It's weird. And then to do that in front of however many 95 million people on Discovery Channel as well. I don't know. It was so deep that I somehow needed. This is sometimes which I haven't really quite got to the bottom of this, why I need to do these things publicly as well. And I think, you know, I fully understand that fame is an utter folly, quite frankly, you know, and not a purpose within itself. And yet, for some reason, I did want to do it on a stage. You know, I wanted people to be able to see it as well. It wasn't just an internal thing. Right,
that's true. I suppose a person who's got the skills to survive could just go and survive. But if interestingly, you raised the point that it was about community and about connection. And possibly about exhibition or demonstration. And I mean, in a way, perhaps all of us have this same sort of need to be loved, this need to be connected. And certainly all of us have the need to somehow resolve the drama of our circumstance, the drama of our childhood. Like this, I must become this, I must solve this.
There's another, again, it's a therapy sort of terminology, but there's this thing called developmental immaturity, where you don't self-parent yourself. And I definitely think I fell into that category. So I would, you know, drive my car at absolute maximum speed down the motorway because there was no version of myself kicking in. And we all have different parts of our personality, but the adult version of myself wouldn't kick in and go, this is not a terribly good idea. Or, you know, when you've had however many pints, and a lot of people would go, do you know what? I've had enough now. I'm going to, you know, go to bed and go home. And whereas that never kicked into me. And apparently there is a psychological term for it, which is, it's not far off from codependency, but, you know, it's in that same sort of thing, which is literally just living in this childlike state, thinking that, you know, you can still be abandoned, thinking that you need to almost be so volatile that no one can ever reject you because you're rejecting them all by your outrageous behaviour, you know. And I think the thing that has enabled me in recent years, because I got married 2 years ago and had a little baby about 6 months ago, and I have no worries that I'm going to be a great dad and a great father, you know. I just don't. I am I'm doing that at the moment, and I don't doubt myself. But I think because I've come through this whole journey, because I genuinely, I meditate every day, and part of my meditation is literally, it's called self-parenting, but it's literally holding my own hand through life, really, rather than neglecting the bit. You know how most people go, like British people especially, they're like, self-love is quite a cringy term, isn't it? You know,
yeah.
Americans might say it a lot, but British people, they don't want to talk about self-love. You know, they take the piss out of themselves. They're far more comfortable putting themselves down or taking the piss out of themselves than they are loving themselves. And I've had to, you know, I do it in a sort of visualization when I meditate each day, and it's just like looking after myself, being kind to myself. And that then enables me to stand and I go, right, I've got my values, I'm looking after myself, and then I can genuinely in life go, look, I'm not lying to anyone, I'm not harming anyone. I'm in a really good position to, you know, love my wife and look after my child and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
When did you start the meditation?
Again, it was a therapy thing. I mean, I was offered whatever the medication was at the time, I can't remember. But
what point in your life is this, by the way?
This was when I couldn't continue filming for Discovery Channel because I had essentially a mini breakdown about a year after coming off the island for 60 days.
So you've done the island. The island's a success. You come back, and then when you get back to normal domestic life, everything sort of hits you. What was that experience? What was happening in your mind and life then? I was in, at the time, a really, really bad relationship. So the first call I made at the end of the island experience was to my, at the time, girlfriend, and we had an argument, and I was just like, I can't believe that she's having a go at me. I've just spent 60 days on a desert island, and she did. So that relationship... Where you bloody been?
I don't know. It was absolutely nuts. I came back, and I think with hindsight, you know, TV, it's a scary thing that, you know, you go to Discovery Channel, you go, I'm going to put myself on a desert island for 60 days. And they said, well, could you survive? Like, no knife, nothing. And I was like, I don't know. And they go, brilliant, let's do it. Because they want to embrace it from a televisual perspective. They want to make entertainment for people. And if I struggled, that would be really entertaining. Nobody really went, yeah, but is this going to do any damage? You know, psychologically, certainly, let alone the sort of physical thing of...
Why did you choose that thing? Why did you choose 60 days on an island alone?
Because I think I was forever sort of gravitating towards an experience where I really genuinely had to know that I could look after myself. I think it was an abandonment thing. I think it was me needing to know that I was capable of surviving on my own. And I don't think that's the end state in life. You know, everyone can be as independent as they like and have as many, you know, survival skills as Ray Mears. But that's not doesn't make you a happy person, does it? I mean, I just needed to come through to the state where I was confident enough in myself as a person to then, you know, open my heart and embrace the people around me. But I think I needed to do one first, if you know what I mean.
So you got back and you have a sort of mental breakdown, and you have this argument with your then partner. What happens? That relationship breaks up and you're alone?
Longer than that, but... I
it's weird that you that being alone would be hard for you. Like after you've done 60 days on an island, you'd think that you're alone proof.
I like people, and you know, I really, you know, the best times in life have always been shared moments. They've never been when I'm completely on my own. I don't think I can pick a moment when sometimes if I go on a run or something, but even that, it's in a certain amount of endorphins are going through your mind, but it's in a certain parameters whereby you know you're going to come home and meet again the people that you love. But I think in general you choose to do the big moments of your life with the people that you love, wouldn't you? You'd choose to spend Millennium, Christmas, New Year's Eve with, you know, your best mates or whatever. And I think, you know, that's what life's about for me, family, friends, that sort of stuff. But you've got to get yourself right first to have a meaningful input to those family and friends, I think.
My book about 12 steps, and the 12 steps themselves from which the book is derived, is about how you go on a journey to be able to be part of a community by addressing these issues. without, going to an island for 60 days, but by going into yourself and knowing that you're probably being motivated by things that you don't understand, and that's why you have to drink, and that's why you have to take drugs, and that's why you have to gamble, or that's why you're shopping too much, or that's why you're in bad relationships, or that's why you're doing a job you don't like, because you've never ever asked yourself the question. You've never stopped and done something as transformative or ritualistic as being alone. I mean, like, the idea of isolation, it's a religious idea, isn't it? Like in monastic cultures, and I bet in them Aboriginal cultures, were they able to go to you? We do something a bit like that anyway. We're 15-year-old boys slung off and told to survive.
Well, they do, don't they? They go walkabout, and one of the absolute Aboriginal traditions is to go off as a young man on your own and spend extended periods of time in the bush on your own, and that is a part of how they evolve into a man, and I think that's no coincidence either. I think, for me, I did need to sit there without any of the distractions, that, be it addictions or not, anything in life that distracts you from just being able to sit with yourself. And I think it's hugely important. If you don't quite know who you are, if you've always, like, people are so busy at work, for example, and then they come home, and because there is that time, okay, in theory my brain could switch off now, but that would be, or I could stop thinking about stuff, but that would be a bit scary. They'll have a glass of wine, and it's just like, I need either to be stupidly busy or to numb my brain. But the other bit, that actually just sitting and feeling how I'm genuinely feeling, that's a scary bit.
Holding reality, being in reality. So who was it that during this time of crisis suggested meditation to you, and how did you get into that?
It was a neuro-linguistic programming lady who was operating called Mal Khan, who operated from a little clinic in Knightsbridge, I think, at the time. And I didn't really get on with the neuro-linguistic programming, but she goes, look, this app is for cynics, and it's it's called Headspace, run by a guy who used to come from Bristol, I think, and he's a sports science guy, but he had a dodgy part of his life, and he went off and became a Buddhist monk, and spent a huge amount of his time actually, studying meditation, and I think Headspace has earned him millions now. It's big in New York. It's big in a lot of countries all over the world, but it's the meditation without the joss sticks and the chanting and the sitting head, and I needed it to be accessible at that stage, because if we rewind a few years, I was very ex-military, and so I would have taken the mickey out of people who told me that I'd be meditating daily. Now, 10 years ago, I would have gone, that's just ridiculous. I'll just have a pint.
Do you believe in God?
I don't really like the sort of religious structure put around. I believe in something bigger than me. I believe in, I suppose, my belief is the closest to it, I think, that I can describe it is the Gaia principle, the concept of the earth acting like a living organism, and therefore there is something positive happening that's bigger than me, that is taking things on a positive journey, that has an interest in things going well and people functioning together and operating as a cohesive unit. And I think for me, that's not religion. I think it's quite a crude way of people trying to use their smallest brain, their logical brain, to actually put sort of parameters on something that you can't really talk about. But it's I believe in something bigger than that.
There is some sort of harmonious connection, like these Aboriginal mentors and tutors that you found and made use of. What is your understanding of what their spirituality is based on?
Well, very similar. I mean, it's the universe. It's they believe that their ancestors are still around, which I think sometimes the way it was described to me is that if your life is like, if you were a jug of water and you poured it, and one drop of water falls out the jug of water back into another jug at the bottom, your life, you feel like you're an individual entity while you're that drop of water, but you're just coming from the sort of source. The top, a source, and you're going straight back to it, and I think that's how they feel. I mean, I certainly know that Jeremy and my Aboriginal friends, they talk about communicating with their ancestors, and they walk in. They have a foot in more than one world, and I think they believe in the universe. I think they believe in the positive forces of the planet. They don't overcomplicate it. I think that's good.
Because they don't make it cerebral, don't use that. What's that tangled mind called again, Ed?
Nandupuru.
There's a word of the day. We have a culture that lives in the Nandupuru mind.
We do, yeah. Undeniably, yeah.
Since you've learned all these skills, does going and being isolated or comparable survival programs, I know obviously you continue to make these very successful programs, are these as important as any other bit of kit or personal ability to physically endure this knowledge of spirit and mind?
It's the most powerful survival tool I've got is I used to say the mind, but it's not, isn't it? It's greater than that. But it's the ability to control my inner state, I think.
Wow.
You know, I've definitely spent days and days and days running around like a headless chicken in survival situations, making a meal of things. But the time when you stop and compose yourself and meditate, that's when it starts going well.
So this is one thing that people that are not surviving in extreme conditions can learn, because we are all surviving on the mountains and terrains and tundras of the inner space, of the inner life, and we have to find a way of, if not reflecting, somehow finding an inner retreat, an inner connection where we can find repose. And like, you know, I agree with what you've said about sort of conventional religion, although I believe a lot of people get to access, get to contact, get to connection through conventional religion. Yeah. But I believe that unless we have this point of, my struggle in my own life is being able to find a point of access like that and then maintain it, because I get distracted away from it. If I get frightened or if I get full of desire, like, it's very hard to keep the connection. So I suppose it's fascinating when someone distills it, as you have done, into obvious, not obvious, sort of, what do I want to say, epic survival conditions. You know, can I survive in this extreme way?
I mean, it's a slightly comical setting, really. I mean, I'm not in a survival situation. I'm being dropped off by a TV crew in an area where they know there's going to be some water and and you're making an entertaining show. And, you know, the parameters are survival. Yes, I've got to light a fire without matches or a lighter. Yes, I've got to find food. But it is essentially a little snapshot of life. It's just life in sort of glorious technicolor, in the fact that you've got to do all of those components. But I'm still stressed about, will I get the right footage to make the program? I'm still worrying about whether I'm going to pay next month's mortgage. You know, all of the normal stuff of life is still there. And therefore, I think with the added component of, because I obviously direct and film everything myself, with that component and surviving, you're
a control freak, eh?
Well,
you're a massive control freak.
I certainly have been, but I think, yeah, therefore meditation is really necessary. Otherwise, I'd just tie myself in knots all the time and it would all become too overwhelming.
Would you be able to do these sustained periods of isolation or even separation now that you are a father and husband?
I've got a new show start filming in January, so I'm going to have to.
So what are you going to do, mate?
I've actually got another show which I think they're going to commission. I'm sure I'm not allowed to say it. But it involves my family. It involves both of them, actually, which could be very...
That is amazing. I really hope that gets made. Because one of the things I think, my fantasist version of this, is it must be so amazing to know that if society falls apart, and sometimes it feels like it might, or even that it should, that like you'd be able to go, right, it's okay, we're going here, we're going to do this, and that must be amazing.
Yeah, no, I actually quite... I do gain a lot of confidence out of knowing that.
Confidence?
Yeah, out of being able to, go into the wood, take two bits of wood, rub them together, be able to make a fire. That's a cool thing. I used to take the mickey so much out of sort of geeks who watch Star Trek and make fire by friction, and used to take the piss out of them. But having gone through that, and I'm a less cynical person now, I think it's a really nice, wholesome, organic skill. So yeah,
it's almost like it would be a lovely thing. I'd love to know that. I'd love to know that, this is what you need to survive. Because I feel like possibly this sense of abandon and vulnerability that you described in your own personal drama, most of us know our life's held together by the power of other people. We're like, we need the house, we need the clothes, we need society, we need the media, we need the advertising, we need the commerce, we need the banks. We can't confront the banks, bring down the bloody government. We'll be dead in 10 minutes because there's no, and one can see in the American survivalist movement that shares that name, that it's a sense of we want to be independent, we want to live tribally, we want to be connected to nature, inner and outer. Like that's that's the impetus, but there's no language to do it, and there's no culture to do it, and there's certainly no way of correlating or conflating the fact that it is a spiritual as well as physical endeavour to be able to survive in the world.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's why my shows are successful, is because people want to vicariously live in this world where they don't need a bank. They don't have to go to the supermarket in order to buy their food. They want to be able to do it for themselves, and yet you're right. You can't achieve that in this world. You can't go off the grid, really. In the UK, certainly, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do so. All sorts of alternative cultures think that they can survive without money, and certainly in the UK, they can't.
We feel like we're owned. And in fact, you also feel like if you tried to do it, forces would step in and prevent it.
Well, they would. I mean, travellers obviously are looked down upon by a huge number of parts of society, aren't they? Because, they're not contributing to the state, but...
Yeah, and all they've said is we've got our own culture, we don't want to do this.
They're making their own choices and they don't want to be a part of the mainstream. And I think inherently a lot of people have a bit of that in them anyway.
For those of us that don't have this monumental will to survive and ambition that you have expressed and achieved such success through, what can we do to access and learn from your trials and your journeys? What would you suggest, even someone like me? I mean, my mate Matt, who's such a fan, like a great fan of yours, you're a great hero of his. He's like staying, or like we want to do camping. He's going definitely in some suspended tent in a private wood in Essex this weekend.
Is he?
Yeah, he is. Right, Saturday and Sunday, and I'm debating whether or not to go with him. I mentioned it to my wife, and she said, "Yeah, you should go. You should go." She wants me out of the bloody house, I think. Is it that we should say, right, some of my life has got to be like that cold plunge in the pond moment where you're hit with the reality of what life is? Would you suggest that sort of thing?
I think it's a really good idea to sort of structure a bit of that into your life, whether that's, going off walking in the Peak District at the weekend or wherever it is. Getting out of London, it's really difficult. I think you can do it in London, but it's really difficult to step out of that heady space when you're in London. It's just there's so much energy with the concentration of people. But
it might be a bit like that Aboriginal man saying "shut the fuck up." It might be like that on times 12 million.
Imagine all of that energy, and I hadn't said a word in that car, and yet he just said, "I just cannot think with all that noise going on in your head."
It's a bit bloody Jedi, that, isn't it?
It is a bit, but it was quite cool as well.
It's well cool.
I think you do. Most of us need to get out in order to get that clarity of thought, or to just stop thinking. And I think London confuses it, or very dense populations do confuse it. Yeah. So
make space for yourself in some way, whether it's like a walk in the Peak, some way of interacting with nature in a very literal way. What do you think of this quote? I think about it sometimes. Chesterton said, "The truly adventurous man would it's an interest," and I'm not saying this is a dig, would instead of trekking across plains and climbing mountains, would simply jump over his next door neighbour's fence. Meaning, I suppose, that adventure is potentially all around us, and what we're bound by, in a sense, is convention, and we all live in restricted space. Do you think that what you have learned as a literal survivalist has had so many evident spiritual connotations and has driven you in the direction of the spirit, that there are ways of crossing boundaries, that these techniques could be applied to the way that are you curious about the way this could affect societies, what you have learned?
I think for me, yeah, I would agree with that, in the fact that I don't feel that need to go and climb a mountain or conquer something that hasn't been achieved before as much anymore. I think, everyone needs meaning in their life, obviously.
Yeah.
And from having a baby recently as well, that suddenly it just changes your perspective on life. You're not the centre of the world anymore. And there's something really meaningful there. And it's okay, it's a bit of a cliche, and everyone says your life changes when you have a baby. But for me, it has all of the stuff that I still do, and I'm not going to stop going on adventures. It feels like it has got a meaning because, again, there's an analogy that a ship is like, or a relationship is like ships in a harbour. It's like built in a harbour and it's safe in the harbour, but you don't build a ship to stay in a harbour. It has to go out, it has to go on journeys, and it has to come back again. And I think it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Yes, it's good to go away on adventures. Yes, it's good to go and have experiences outside of the nucleus of the family, but invariably you're going to come back, and it makes going on those journeys all the more meaningful because you've got something wholesome and meaningful to come back to.
Didn't think before that's why it's called relationship. Like you're meant to go on a voyage. I mean, it wasn't meant to be a pun, but yeah, I know it basically was. Wow. So I think I am gonna go and do this camping weekend thing. What I want to do learn some surviving things off you. Well, perhaps what should we do? Is there some way you can think of formatting that or turning it into anything? Like, I mean, not necessarily for television, but possibly for television. Like, I feel like, what would you suggest?
It wouldn't be a difficult thing to set up a survival scenario where we could go in and teach you, Matt, if he wants to as well.
He'll be all over it.
Some survival stuff, and then set you to it. Whether that's as a two or individually on your own, if you wanted to experience the isolation bit as well. But eminently doable, really doable. Yeah, I'd love to as well.
Wow. Yeah. That's a real good play. And is there anything, just to return again, so like, what's a simple thing? Because people listen to this podcast to learn things. You know, like we hear, and you've been absolutely fantastic. Like, I want to do this, because then, like, the whole time I'm doing it, I'm thinking, this is all information. This is amazing information. I need this information. So, look, he's actually showed, Matt Morgan is actually outside, standing in the corridor, looking very Nordic, actually. Come in. Come in. Don't be so silly. It's all right. So, Under the Skin listeners, if you listen to the Radio X show that I also do, you will have heard of Matt Morgan. We're going to wrap up the show soon. But, Matt, would you... He can't even get in the bloody studio. Matt Morgan, Ed Stafford.
Hello, mate.
Ed Stafford.
How are you?
Hi, mate. I love you.
All right, so Matt Morgan and Ed, come and share my microphone. I don't want you bothering Ed, because we've established. Yeah, let's not try and pretend that we're cool in front of Ed now. I've already told Ed that we're planning to do this. Well, that you are definitely camping.
I'm definitely doing it. I don't think he's going to do it. You're not going to do it.
He says he is.
One night?
Yeah, well, possibly one night. Is there any other, like, Ed's been absolutely amazing and talking about, like, a lot of stuff. This would be the podcast that I'd most recommend that you listen to. I think that you'll love it. What sort of trials and what sort of techniques and tips would you suggest that people listening to this now should try in our own lives, that without, as I was saying, being a monumental adventurer?
Well, I mean, for me, the thing that's helped me, and I do use it in survival situations and outside, is what we've already talked about, but that's meditation. And the app that I spoke about, the Headspace, just
don't use your cultural collateral.
10 minutes, 20. I don't have anything to do with promoting.
I know you don't.
I genuinely don't, but I love
Let's start our own one.
Use it every day. Well, let's start our own one. Just taking that time out to be able to see your own.
We'll get him as a guest.
See your own thoughts and have some perspective over being wrapped up in your own life and being super, involved in your own little stories. It's just stepping that one step back and be able to have a bit of perspective and clarity on it all. And that's helped me at home, in relationships, in survival situations, across the board.
I just imagine it must be a phenomenal lesson to know that you can survive emotionally, that you can survive spiritually, that you can survive physically, and the importance that you've placed on the spiritual component of that. And I must say, I wasn't pushing Ed in that direction. Has been
not much.
He doesn't shut up about that.
Can we talk about stuff that I know something about, so I can compete in this chat? No, but I think that's fantastic. Matt, do you want to ask a question as you're here, and Ed is your hero?
But bivvy bags, right?
Yes.
If I'm in a tent, this is because I'm going tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Is there any? Do they keep you any warmer in a tent, or is it just like they're instead of a tent? You don't.
If you're in a tent, you don't need.
You don't need it.
No.
Okay.
No.
I could have told you that.
If it's a 2-skin tent, it's got an inner and an outer.
Yep.
Yeah. No, you don't need one.
Okay.
No. But if you want to sleep outside just in the bivvy bag, then that's an option. I'd go for like polyester rather than a full Gore-Tex, because you could get a bit sweaty.
Right, it's getting very real now. So the last words that Ed, after all that fantastic stuff, has said were, you get a bit sweaty. After talking about the true nature of man, access to the infinite, that we are water travelling between jugs. We're connected to the source and we're connected to the force with Ed Stafford. Thank you. That's been a tremendous education. I'm going to take you up on those survival offers. I really am.
Thank you, Russell.
What offers?
Aha. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Under the Skin. Cheers. This show was sponsored by my book, Recovery, which is available now. You can order it on Amazon. You can also get the audiobook, which is terrific. Check it out. The things we've been talking about in this show have a spiritual and mental component, and I may not be an access on surviving out in the world or even in a car on my own, but I do know how to deal with your own madness. Also, come see me on Rebirth Tour for a bit of fun and a bit of escape. Birmingham on the 5th of December, Leicester on the 6th of December, Brixton on the 19th of December. I guarantee you we will have fun. Go to russellbrand.com for tickets. If you like the show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Lots of love to all of you. Thanks for listening.